had a fight with his grandmother over failing to graduate. She was shot in the face and is in critical condition. 18-year-old Salvador Ramos posted messages on social media hinting about his evil plans. Wait till tomorrow when this warning and this, kids be scared, along with photos of 2 assault rifles and a high-capacity magazine.
When he went in the classroom, he said, "You're all gonna die," and he just told you, "I'm dead," so he won't shoot me.
The decision to have officers wait for backup and a SWAT team as gunshots echoed inside Robb Elementary in Uvalde Tuesday was the wrong decision, and possibly a dead one.
The fallout for the school police chief, Pete Arredondo, who investigators say made the call to wait.
19 children and 2 teachers are dead after an 18-year-old gunman opened fire inside a joined classroom. "I just shot my grandmother in the head. I'm going to shoot up an elementary school right now." That last message sent at 6:21 p.m. German time, which would have been 11:21 in Uvalde, Texas.
Losing that little piece of my heart, I lost my son.
Nothing's gonna change. I mean, this always happens in a small town. Nobody expects anything bad to happen, and then it happens, and everybody wants to make changes to prevent it from happening, and then it dies down a little bit, and then it happens again, and then it's a cycle.
Well, the world seems to be doing crazy things as time progresses. In the last few days, we've had 2 major incidents. Those being the Buffalo shooting that happened in New York, and the second one being the one that we are going to be talking about, which is the shooting that took place in Robb Elementary School, which is located in Uvalde, Texas. The lone suspect in this case is 18-year-old Salvador Ramos, who was the one who was responsible for the death of 19 students ranging from 8 to 11 years old, as well as 2 teachers who had sadly passed away as of the 24th of May. This is a very tragic incident that happened out of nowhere. These kids were all victims of a deranged individual. This shooting is the 3rd most deadly shooting in the US, behind the Virginia Tech shooting with 33 deaths and Sandy Hook Elementary with 28 deaths. This is the 2nd deadliest shooting that was targeted towards an elementary school. This case is very heartbreaking as well as triggering. This will be your trigger warning. You have been warned. So this case happened recently on May 24th of this year. The lone suspect of this case is Salvador Ramos, who was involved in the shooting where he shot and killed 21 victims. This all started on Tuesday on May 24th at 11 a.m. Salvador sends a private message to a German girl called Cici. Salvador was speaking with a girl complaining that his grandmother was calling AT&T about his phone. This was because Salvador failed to graduate on time, so he had an argument with his grandmother. He complained to the girl about the argument he had a few minutes later, around 11:21 a.m. He sent a message that said, "I just shot my grandma in her head." A few seconds later he said, "I'm gonna go shoot up an elementary school right now." After that final message, Salvador stole his grandmother's pickup truck and crashed into a ditch on his way to Robb Elementary at 11:28 a.m. He jumps out of the vehicle and proceeds on foot with a gun in hand, as well as a bag that contained 315 rounds of ammunition. On a side note, the average soldier who is prepared for combat has 730-round magazines, which contain 210 rounds of ammunition in total. So Salvador was carrying roughly 50% more than the average soldier who is armed for combat. Salvador Ramos was running across the parking lot, shooting his gun when he was running across. Okay, so this next part is a point of contempt since the police retracted a few of their statements revolving the exact timeline. I will explain which details were changed in a later section. One key detail that has 2 different stories revolving around how exactly Salvador got into the building. So you are probably wondering, how the hell did Salvador get in the building? So apparently a teacher who heard the car crash propped open the door, but then the teacher left it open, so Salvador went inside. But the police retracted their statement and said that Salvador got in due to the door's lock mechanism failing, so Salvador got in. Even though there were two different stories, the end result is the same. Salvador got into the building with no resistance, which is scary since most school doors have a lock mechanism in place, so suspicious outsiders don't get into the building. Around 11:28 a.m., the first phone call to the police was made by a teacher who ran outside and saw Salvador running to the school, so this teacher rushed into the building in a panic and left the door open. Even though this detail is a little bit confusing, what was true was the fact that this teacher made a phone call to the police right after running into the building. Two male witnesses who were at a funeral home across the street from the school heard the car crash, and they both went outside to see what had happened, but they ran back inside and phoned the police.
I tell him, run, he has a gun. We both take our running. As I turn around, I fell. As soon as I'm getting up, I'm looking back, and this guy's already pointing at us. And you just hear, pa, 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 pa. And I could just hear a ricochet, pshoo, pshoo, pshoo. And I look at him like that, and I get up, and as I'm running, I look back, and he was aiming that barrel right at me and Michael.
Around 11:31 a.m., Salvador was near the last row of vehicles that were closest to the school building. He began to shoot at the school's windows as the school was placed into a lockdown. The U.S. Marshals Service was called to assist the Uvalde Police Department. Another thing that was off about this story was, where was the school's resource officer? He is supposed to be on guard of the school, but surprisingly he was nowhere to be seen when Salvador was running across the parking lot. He got the call that there was an active shooter on campus, so he rushed back to the school in order to intercept the gunman. The school resource officer drove right past Ramos when he was sweeping the area. This is understandable since Salvador was hunkered down behind a vehicle, but it was very careless since the school was clearly in danger. This detail was also changed because an initial statement by the police was that the resource officer had confronted Salvador, but this is in fact not true, because the officer was not at his post and he had made a very dangerous mistake when he drove past Salvador. Salvador finally entered the school at 11:33 a.m., where he had shot about 100 rounds into two adjoining classrooms, those being class 111 and 112. At 11:35 a.m., 3 Uvalde Police Department officers entered through the same door that Salvador entered through, and in no time 3 other officers entered the building, as well as a county sheriff. At this time, there was a total of 7 officers on the scene ready to take down the shooter. The first 3 officers that were on the scene went directly to the classroom where Salvador was staying, but things went south immediately when the 3 officers retreated after 2 of them suffered grazing wounds. 2 minutes later, at 11:37 a.m., another 16 rounds were fired in the classroom. At 11:42 a.m., a teacher received a text warning them about an active shooter in the building. Then Robb Elementary makes an announcement on Facebook that the school was on lockdown due to gunshots in the area. And they also said that the students and staff are safe in the building. At around 11:44 a.m., officers called for additional resources, equipment, body armor, negotiators, and support for the students and teachers that were evacuating the building. A few minutes later, at 11:51 a.m., more officers arrived on the scene, and at 12:03 p.m., as many as 19 officers were on the scene ready to take down the active shooter. But they were not doing anything to stop the active shooter. At 12:03 p.m., a young girl inside the classroom made a call to 911, and she quietly relayed information to the authorities. She hung up shortly thereafter, and then she called 911 again, 10 minutes later, confirming that several students were dead. In the meantime, around 12:10 p.m., the first group of deputy U.S. Marshals had arrived to assist, so at this time, federal, state, and local law enforcement were on the scene, ready to fight the suspect, right? Well, no. They just waited on the scene, and 5 minutes later, members of the Border Patrol's tactical unit, BORTAC, arrived on the scene. So in theory, they had enough manpower to fight this lone shooter. But the police chief in charge of the situation, named Pedro Arredondo, made the call to not breach because he determined that the shooter had barricaded himself. This decision was a fatal mistake that cost the life of many more children. And what makes this even crazier is the fact that everyone was on standby and okay with this decision. 2 more phone calls from the surviving students were made during this waiting period. They said that there were 8 to 9 students still alive. Robb Elementary put up a second Facebook post at 12:17 p.m. where they told everyone to cooperate with law enforcement by not visiting the campus. At 12:21 p.m., more shots were heard coming from the room Salvador was in. At 12:36 p.m., the initial student who made the 911 call called again. She told dispatchers that he shot the door and immediately hung up a few seconds later. Another call came in 7 minutes later at 12:43 p.m. where a young girl asked the dispatcher to please send the police. And the same student called again at 12:47 p.m. requesting police and law enforcement, who did nothing. At 12:50 p.m., Border Patrol agents opened the door using the janitor's keys, and they promptly shot and killed the suspect, finally ending the living nightmare these children were enduring. This shooting started around 11:28 a.m. and ended at 12:50 p.m. This shooting lasted an hour and 22 minutes, or 82 painstaking minutes, in which chaos erupted from parents who were desperately trying to get into the building to save their children, and some who were actually trying to go confront the suspect. Now that you're caught up to date with what went on, I want to address the aftermath of this terrible incident. Since things have gone crazy, I want to talk about how both the public and law enforcement reacted since a lot of things happened. People in the community of Uvalde grieved over this incident because of the lives of very young and innocent children were lost to a senseless attack. People were very grief-stricken, so the community, family members of the victims, were devastated and were giving their condolences to those who lost their lives. Sadly, the husband of Irma Garcia, Joe Garcia, passed away due to heartbreak after attending his wife's funeral. This tragic passing left 4 children behind, but this incident sparked a debate on gun control as well as safety precautions to avoid this tragedy from happening again, as well as criticism towards the police for how they handled this incident. Governor Greg Abbott wants state officials to inspect schools to safety protocols after this incident had happened. He wrote a letter to the Texas School Safety Center to work with the education agency on implementing safety checks in order to make sure students are safe. He told Kathy Martinez-Prather your team should begin conducting in-person unannounced random intruder detection audits on school districts. He also adds, staff should approach campuses to find weak points and how quickly they can penetrate buildings without being stopped. Republican state leaders have been completely on board with more gun control measures. Rather, they want to focus on the idea of hardening campuses. Some popular suggestions are limiting the amount of entrances into the building, as well as having more armed individuals, such as officers on campus and even teachers. Abbott also asked lawmakers to examine what legislation and action can be done to prevent this incident from happening again in the near future. He specifically wants to focus on mental health, social media, police training, and firearm safety. Abbott didn't include restrictions for gun control in his letter. Democrats have wanted to add more restriction for firearms. Possible solutions are raising the age for the purchase of semi-automatic rifles to 21. The way this situation was handled is mind-boggling and downright disgusting, as this case was poorly mishandled. As for the shooter, he was killed in a shootout. But the outcry that came from the public is quite understandable since too many things went wrong and the police's response during the shooting was a complete, utter fiasco. The chief of police, Peter Arredondo, was the one who made the fatal error of deciding to wait to confront Ramos in Uvalde, Texas. The chief of police, Pedro Arredondo, was the one who made the fatal mistake of deciding to wait to confront Ramos in Uvalde, Texas. Witnesses said that frustrated onlookers urged police officers to charge into Robb Elementary School. As soon as the attack began, nearby women shouted at the officers, "Go in there," said Juan Carranza, 24, who witnessed the scene from his home across the street from Robb Elementary. Officers did not enter the building, says Juan. When Javier Cázares heard about the incident, he rushed to the school, arriving just as the police were assembling outside. The massacre claimed the life of his 4th grade daughter, Jacqueline Cázares. Javier was furious, and understandably, since the cops were idle. He recommended charging into the school with a group of bystanders. "Let's just rush in since the cops aren't doing their job," Javier said. In addition to that, parents were pepper sprayed, pinned to the ground, and even handcuffed, which enraged many bystanders and parents. Angeli Rose Gomez, a parent who has 2 children in the 2nd and 3rd grade, is said to have driven 40 miles to the school after learning of the incident. She was one of the frantic parents who urged cops to enter the school with a growing sense of urgency. According to the Wall Street Journal, Gomez claimed, "The police were doing nothing. They were just standing outside the fence and weren't going in." The federal marshals eventually handcuffed Gomez and informed her that she was being held for interfering with an ongoing investigation. Later on, Gomez said she was able to persuade a Uvalde officer she knew to have the marshal release her, and she took the chance to get away from the crowd, jumped the school gate, and ran into the school to save her children herself. Although her actions were reckless and could have gotten her killed, she did what any other parent would do in her situation when one's own offspring is in immediate danger. However, there is additional shocking information which has surfaced as of recently, which further supports the claims that bystanders that the cops were negligent in responding to the situation. According to agents from Border Patrol, they hurried to the location after hearing the event on scanners. And the law enforcement officer who spoke anonymously to the New York Times from the Uvalde Police Department told them not to go inside when they arrived. Juan Carranza had seen Salvador Ramos drive his truck into a ditch outside the school prior to the shooting. It was a bystander who confronted Ramos, but he got shot at, so he ran away. Eventually he, alongside other parents, got together and tried to storm the school together against law enforcement's wishes. Officials said he encountered a school district security officer outside the school, though authorities disagree on whether the 2 men exchanged fire. Ramos stormed into one classroom after entering the school and began shooting children. According to Lieutenant Christopher Olivares of the Department of Public Safety, he barricaded himself by closing the door and just started shooting children and teachers that were within that classroom. Salvador's course of action in the shooting demonstrates his utter regard for life and showcases his cruel wickedness. Salvador took the lives of 21 victims as investigators worked to piece together the 40-minute massacre. The nightmare ended when Salvador was finally taken care of by a team of Border Patrol agents. Texas authorities revealed new information on the night of May 26th and claimed that they didn't rush in to find the shooter after being fired at on Tuesday because they were afraid of being murdered, and that they may have purposefully locked the gunman in the classroom where he slaughtered the 21 victims in order to trap him and prevent even further bloodshed from taking place at Robb Elementary. The Department of Safety Lieutenant Chris Olivares made astonishing comments during an appearance on CNN last night on May 26th. Doesn't current best practice, Lieutenant, require officers to disable a shooter as quickly as possible, regardless of the number of officers on the scene? Blitzer questioned Olivares. Olivares responded to Blitzer, stating, "In an active shooter situation, you want to stop the killing and preserve lives." He appeared to try to take responsibility for the gunman being locked in the classroom with the kids for an hour, saying that it saved other kids, including several he shot at the start of the spree. Unfortunately, it was later revealed that children had died in the hospital. Not only that, but a mother was told by first responders that her daughter may have survived the massacre if authorities had acted quicker. The child was struck in the back through the kidney area by a single bullet. State Senator Ronald Gutierrez told CNN on Sunday morning. The first responder they spoke with indicated their child had most likely bled out and that little girl may have lived in that extra 30 or 40 minutes. This claim was further supported by Dr. Ronald Stewart, a senior trauma surgeon at the University Hospital in Antonio, told NBC News on Thursday that you can't wait for patients to go to a trauma center. You must act swiftly, Dr. Ronald says. Furthermore, the blatant negligence of the police gets even more unsettling, as instructions from the Texas Police Chiefs Association says. The first 2 to 5 responding officers should form a single team and enter the structure. They require training officers to neutralize the threat, even if that means one officer acting alone, which means that they should prioritize the safety of the victim. The guide also says, a first responder unwilling to place the lives of the innocent above their own safety should consider another career field. The class for active shooter response for school-based law enforcement was put together by the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement in 2020. The bill was passed in 2019 by the Texas legislature after the shooting of Santa Fe High School a year before in 2018, which caused the death of 8 students and 2 teachers. Weirdly enough, the Uvalde CISD Police Department had hosted the training 2 months prior to the shooting. The training follows 3 steps in order to stop the threat: isolate, distract, or neutralize the threat. Section 2.2. This is done in order to minimize the amount of damage the suspect can do toward any more victims. Officers do not have to enter the same room as the suspect, but what is expected of the officers is to make sure that there are no more victims in danger. But it doesn't mean that the officers should stay put. Officers are usually required to put themselves in danger in order to help victims. And the document on Unit 2, Section 2, specifies a priority list of life, with innocent civilians being at the top of the list, then followed by first responders being a close second, and finally, the offenders are at the bottom. It also says that the immediate decisive action by the school-based officers can have a dramatic impact on reducing casualties. The section specifies how to accomplish the 3 primary goals, which is to isolate the suspect by segregating them away from the innocent people to minimize any more casualties. Then you have to distract the attacker by engaging with him to drain them of resources, as well as giving time for civilians to escape and for more backup to arrive if needed. Finally, officers are required to neutralize the target by taking away their ability to do more harm to others by disarming them, taking them into custody by making them surrender, or disabling them even if you have to cripple or even kill them if necessary. If the attacker is isolated with no victims and no room for escape, officers are not required to enter the same room. If the suspect flees from the campus, authorities don't have to chase him, but they are required to communicate the last known direction and location of the attacker to the other officers. Unit 3 has a section on how to stop the shooter in the case of a solo response, which explains what an officer should be doing when approaching the threat. Time is key in a situation like this, because the shooters can easily kill or injure a room full of people in a moment's notice. The amount of casualties are determined by 2 factors: the speed at which a shooter can find the victims and the response of the police or other armed forces. In section 5.2, it explains the procedure for treating the people who are injured, and one section is about bleeding control, which explains how to treat the wounded, since they are oftentimes going to die if they lose too much blood if they are bleeding uncontrollably. Kids are very frail and are more likely to die since they have a smaller body frame. So this means that they can suffer more damage from bullets and they have less blood. If the body loses more than half of the blood of its normal volume, irreversible shock sets in and it cannot survive, regardless of medical care it eventually receives. According to Healthline, the average kid who weighs 80 pounds has 2,650 milliliters of blood, or 2.65 liters of blood. In comparison to the average adult who weighs between 150 to 180, carries between 4,500 to 5,700 milliliters, the average adult has 4.5 to 5.7 liters. A kid has about half the blood of an average adult, which makes time the police's greatest enemy. A small girl was shot and rushed to the hospital but sadly passed away. The little girl could have lived if the police hadn't been slow to respond. The whole guide has a lot of training scenarios that are used so that officers have an idea of what to do during a shooting. as well as giving direct orders on what to do in a shooting from start to finish. Why was that advice ignored by the Uvalde officers? As well as why the police were slow to respond? The answer is convoluted, and currently the Uvalde Police Center has been under investigation as well as being questioned by the media. The police constantly changed their story time and time again due to people having varying explanations as to what had happened. The Justice Department has launched a probe into the handling of the shooting. The goal of the review is to provide an independent account of law enforcement actions and responses that day, and to identify lessons learned and the best practices to help first responders prepare for and respond to active shooter events. Department spokesperson Anthony Coley said, "This statement is tone deaf, as they claim the review of the shooting will be helpful in identifying lessons learned that day." How could they make a statement like that even after they demonstrated the authorities' incompetence, reluctance, and lack of courage to confront Salvador when he was a clear threat to the children at the school? This statement has been negatively received by the public, as they have dubbed the Uvalde police as cowardly. Whether it is true or false, it isn't our place to make that judgment. I am simply here to state the facts. Even though some of the training methods aren't optimal for every situation, there was a training course for dealing with an active shooter. Investigation suggests that the authorities didn't follow their training. They forgot the most important thing, which is to mitigate the amount of damage and lives lost, even if it means putting themselves in active danger. During situations where people's lives are at stake, a police officer is meant to protect them, and this slow response was the reason why so many lives were lost. So earlier you saw that Salvador had very disturbing messages that were directed towards others. He exhibited a lot of disturbing behavior, and I want to make it clear that what Salvador did was a malicious act. He was a disturbed individual who has a history of violence, but he had no criminal history. Former friends who commented on his very disturbed behavior. Santos Valdez was a former friend who spoke about Salvador to the news. He said that he was close friends with Salvador since elementary, but they drifted apart after Salvador's behavior was becoming more and more disturbing. He said that he would often play basketball, and one day he showed up with a lot of cuts on his face. When questioned, he said that he was scratched by a cat, but he would later reveal the truth about the scars. He said that he cut his face with knives. Valdez said, "You're crazy, bro. Why would you do that?" And Salvador just said that he did it just for fun. This incident would cause their friendship to drift apart. Another person who went to school with Salvador, named Stephen Garcia, also commented about Salvador's school life since they were both school friends. Stephen said that Salvador would get bullied by others over social media, over gaming, over everything. This was because of his stutter as well as his lisp. Salvador once wore black eyeliner and posted a picture on social media which brought him a lot of harassment, calling him gay and a lot of other derogatory terms describing a gay person. Garcia tried to defend him, but he eventually had to move away due to his mother's work. Valdez would from time to time hang out with Salvador at night. Salvador, Valdez, and another friend would engage in some reckless activities like shooting at random people with a BB gun and egging people's cars. After Garcia left, Ramos had dropped out of school. He started wearing all black clothing as well as large military boots, as well as growing his hair out. So after dropping out, he was not on track to graduating with classmates of the same age. Salvador chose to chat with people via social media since he had a rough school life. So he joined Yubo, which was a social media that connects people via live stream rooms as well as virtually meeting others by playing games and chatting. Ramos also threatened to commit sexual violence, kidnapping, and murder women, as well as harassing girls on Yubo. Users ended up dubbing him Yubo's school shooter. Salvador boasted about the guns he had purchased, and in a voice call he said that some people deserve to be He always had a fascination with guns since he would post photos of assault rifles that were on his wish list. His home life was full of problems since he and his mom, Adriana Martinez Reyes, had arguments with his mother because she tried to kick him out of their home. People who were close to the family as well as family members knew about Adriana's drug use, which was the cause of their very heated arguments. Ruben Flores was a close neighbor to Salvador who tried to be there for him as a father figure. He went out of his way to include Salvador in family events like barbecues as well as sleepovers with their sons. Over time, the problems were becoming more apparent to the point where police were called to the scene and the neighbors saw the incident. Salvador's grandmother owned the property where both him and his mother were living. Eventually, his grandmother evicted Adriana because her drug problem was getting out of hand. Ramos seems to have a lot of repressed anger as well as having mental health issues. He actually got into a few fistfights among peers, so he burned a lot of bridges and had a lot of short-lived friendships, and surprisingly, an ex-girlfriend. Reyes once commented to a former friend that he dreamed of joining the Marines so he could kill people. A few people said that he wasn't particularly bullied, and what I mean by that is that he wasn't bullied because kids were just being mean to him. This happened over time because he was often causing or looking for trouble, which caused people to antagonize him. I'm not saying that the bullying was justified. What I am saying is that he was just never a really good person. He would often hurt animals and do a lot of messed up stuff, which caused him to be alienated, as well as him just being socially inept, with a reason why he was lonely.
Salvador Ramos was a boy who was not bullied. He would try to pick on people but fail, and it would aggravate him. I'd like to get that out of the way. He was not bullied. He, prior, and I don't see this covered, and I'm going to put this out there, he would hurt animals. He was not a good person. He would go to the parks and try to pick fights.
Did you know that he had guns?
No, like I say, he had just turned 18 and he went and bought it. And he told this friend of his, look what I got. And the friend said, hey bro, what do you need those for? He says, don't worry about it.
This next section is very messed up, so be warned that this next detail contains animal abuse. So if you don't wish to see this, skip to this time. David Trevino, a former friend of Ramos, said that Ramos would hurt animals, specifically cats. One video was discovered in which he was holding up the remains of a dead cat in a bag. Trevino said, I'm told he killed the cats and carried around the bag of bodies for giggles. All of this disturbing behavior was overlooked by many, and it was never brought up to the authorities or anyone around. This shooting was the cause of various things going wrong with Salvador, which were left unaddressed, which later resurfaced in this very tragic incident. Ramos never received the help he needed. He just grew up in a terrible environment, as well as having existing mental health issues. We are not here to provide a solution, but instead we are here to state possible outcomes as well as some what ifs. As the tragedy ended and shocked the nation at 8:45 p.m., US President Biden, who returned from Japan on Tuesday, spoke to the country from the Roosevelt Room of the White House. Uvalde, Texas. The president stated from the White House Roosevelt Room, with First Lady Jill Biden by his side. According to the DailyMail.com, Joe Biden made a claim stating, Robb Elementary, it is a primary school where 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade students are lovely and innocent. For God's sake. President Biden personally visited the families of those affected in the Uvalde massacre and paid his respects to those who died during the horrific tragedy in the small community of Uvalde on May 24th of this year. President Biden also spoke about the multiple mass shootings that have occurred over the last decade, like Sandy Hook Elementary School, where a shooter killed 26 people, including 20 children, when he was vice president. He also commented on the mass shooting in Buffalo, New York, earlier this month, which claimed the lives of 10 individuals. Biden also had this to say, according to the DailyMail.com, to urge Congress to come up with a bipartisan framework on gun safety. I've had enough of it. We must take action, and don't tell me we cannot make a difference in this carnage. I spent my career as a senator and vice president working to pass common sense gun laws. Joe Biden's statement, pleading with Congress to work together, is a challenge since votes are split by political party and ideologies. For those of you watching who are not familiar or understand the origins of the U.S., Joe Biden's statement pleading with Congress to work together is a challenge since votes are split by political party and ideologies. For those of you watching who are not familiar or understand the origins of gun ownership in the U.S., let me enlighten you. This is the amendment that has been in the U.S. Constitution since the beginning of being a part of the first 10 amendments that are called the Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment states, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. This basically means the government shall not infringe on the right of U.S. citizens to keep and use a gun. According to a 2017 Pew Research Center survey, 30% of all Americans own a gun, while 42% live in a household with a gun. According to a 2017 Pew Research Center survey, guns have been a part of the country's history and culture from the days of the American Revolution to present day, which is the reason as to why Americans are often seen as gun-wielding maniacs by the rest of the world. In America, there are restrictions, but the restrictions aren't very difficult to overcome. Even though laws and restrictions vary from state to state, we're able to purchase firearms. This is often a point of controversy since people have varied opinions why we should keep guns as well as why we should ban them. Now that you have been filled in on the origins of gun ownership in the US, let's talk about further information that happened. Official versions of how police responded to the incident were contradictory at best. The day after the killings, Texas Governor Greg Abbott praised the bravery of police officers, saying they had saved lives. However, later on he claimed to be enraged that investigators had deceived him about the reaction on Friday. Representative Joaquin Castro, a Democrat from Texas, who has called for an independent FBI inquiry of the police response, visited the school on Saturday and told Reuters that the contradicting information that has emerged was deeply troubling him. As of lately, while this video was in production, a divided House of Representatives took a vote on gun control legislation. One of these gun control legislation proposals is to raise the age for purchasers of semi-automatic rifles to 21. According to a New York Times article, it states 9 Republicans voted in favor of that provision and 2 Democrats opposed it. Surprisingly, the outcome of the overall vote in the House of Representatives was 223 to 204. This vote came hours after parents and children who were affected by the bloodbath that Ramos had executed testified and made arguments urging the House committee to take action regarding gun violence in our nation. As this bipartisan proposal is approved by the House, the Senate will determine the final call. However, there are politicians who want to enact a ban on assault rifles completely. This controversial proposal going to the extreme on outright banning assault rifles has support from few people. Yet, critics argue this ban breaches citizens' Second Amendment to bear arms, which is protected explicitly in the US Constitution. In addition to that, a scenario in which assault rifles are banned will be strikingly similar to the ban of manufacturing and consumption of alcohol during the Prohibition in the US. The ban of alcohol was also known as the 18th Amendment in the US Constitution. The 18th Amendment states, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors. In simple terms, the amendment states it is prohibited to manufacture alcohol, sell alcohol, and even consume alcoholic beverages in the United States. According to the article by the ConstitutionCenter.org, Congress passed the 18th Amendment on December 18, 1917, and it was ratified on January 16, 1919. Although, as a result of the 18th Amendment being certified, criminal organizations started to pop up to fulfill the people's demand for the prohibited goods in the Prohibition era, and crime rose as a result. Now imagine the same scenario, except this time, instead of banning alcohol, it is the banning of assault rifles and guns. It is not easy to take away something that we take for granted. If people were to remove the Second Amendment, not everyone will be happy, and some people would break the rules. As you can imagine, the people would be upset with the new ban set into effect throughout the nation, as it would be considered an attack on the Second Amendment. According to the article ConstitutionCenter.org, it states by the early 1930s, prohibition had become unpopular and Congress passed the 21st Amendment. With its repeal provision, in February 1933, just before Franklin Roosevelt became president, this statement proves that banning something from the people that they used to have access to breeds resentment to the ban on a prohibited good or item. As history has shown us, people realized that it was a grave mistake and made massive efforts to repeal the 18th Amendment. Now back to our gun ban scenario. If we as a nation decide to overturn the gun ban, according to ConstitutionCenter.org, changing the actual words of the Constitution does take an amendment, as does actually deleting or repealing an amendment, which basically means for our gun ban scenario, we would have to introduce a new amendment, for example, the Second Amendment, in order to repeal a ban on guns and automatic rifles. Currently, more information and reactive actions by officials are still ongoing during the time of this recording, but one thing is certain: Ramos never received the help he needed. He just grew up in a terrible environment, as well as having existing mental health issues. This shooting was the cause of various things going wrong with Salvador, which were left unaddressed. The grief inflicted on the small tight-knit community of Uvalde, Texas, committed by a deranged individual, will take a tremendous amount of healing to overcome. Our thoughts and condolences are with the families affected. A GoFundMe link to support the Uvalde community will be provided in the description below. Guys, if you liked the video, please give it a like, and if you're new, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.